The cold metal floor pressed against Jake Morrison's face as he slowly opened his eyes. His head hurt badly and his vision was blurry. He tried to move his arms, but they were tied behind his back with something strong. The room around him was dark, lit only by a strange blue light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Jake forced himself to stay calm. He had been trained for this. The last thing he remembered was the explosion. His team had been on a secret mission on New Horizon, a small human colony on the edge of known space. They were supposed to gather information about alien ship movements. Then the sky had turned white with fire and everything went dark. Now he was here. Wherever here was. Jake slowly sat up, fighting the pain in his ribs. The room was small, maybe 10 feet on each side. The walls were smooth and gray, made of some material he did not recognize. There were no windows, no door that he could see. Just walls and that strange blue light. He looked down at himself. His uniform was torn and burned in places. Blood had dried on his arms and face. But he was alive. That was something. He took a deep breath and started to think. First rule of being captured was to gather information. Learn everything about your prison. Find the weaknesses. Wait for the right moment. Jake studied the walls more carefully. Up close, he could see thin lines in the metal. Seams were panels connected. Tiny holes that might be cameras or sensors. He counted them. 17 that he could see. Someone was watching him. A sound made him turn his head. Part of the wall was moving, sliding open to reveal a doorway. 3 figures stepped inside. They were not human. The first alien was tall, maybe 7 feet, with gray skin that looked rough like stone. It had 4 arms and eyes that glowed yellow in the dim light. The second one was shorter but wider, with purple skin and too many joints in its legs. The third looked like the leader. It wore some kind of uniform with symbols on the chest. Its face was almost human, but the eyes were wrong. Too large, too knowing, the leader spoke. The words came out as clicks and hisses, but then Jake heard English in his ear. There must be a translator somewhere in the room. You are awake, human. Good. My name is Commander Vrex of the Calaxian Empire. You are now our prisoner. You will answer our questions. Jake said nothing. He just looked at Vrex with calm blue eyes. No fear showed on his face. Vrex stepped closer. You were found on New Horizon during our attack. You and your team were spying on our fleet movements. Your friends are dead. You are alone. Tell us what we want to know and your death will be quick. Still, Jake stayed quiet. He was thinking, learning. Vrex spoke good English. That meant the Calaxians had been studying humans for a while. They knew about human colonies, about human military. That was important information. The purple alien, the one called Thalen, moved forward. It held something in its hand, a device that looked like a cross between a medical tool and a weapon. Nothing pleasant, Jake was sure. We have ways of making you talk, Thalen said. Its voice was higher than Vrex's, almost musical. But Jake heard the threat in it clearly. We have broken many prisoners. You will be no different. Jake allowed himself a small smile. That seemed to confuse them. The gray alien took a step back. Vrex's eyes narrowed. You find this amusing, human? Vrex asked. Jake finally spoke. His voice was rough but steady. I have heard that before. From enemies who thought they were scary. Most of them are dead now. The room went silent. Then Vrex laughed. It was not a nice sound. Brave words for a man in chains. We shall see how long that bravery lasts. The aliens left and the wall closed behind them. Jake was alone again. He waited exactly 30 seconds, counting in his head. Then he tested the restraints on his wrists. They were strong but not impossible. He would need time and the right tool. But he had plenty of time. The next few days were hard. Thalen came back many times with his device. Pain was something Jake had trained for, but training could only help so much. The device sent electricity through his body. It made his muscles lock up and his mind scream. But he never talked. He gave them nothing. Between the sessions, Jake worked. He had found a small piece of wire in the ventilation cover above his head. It had taken him 6 hours to loosen the cover just enough to pull the wire free. Now he kept it hidden, working on the restraints whenever he was alone. He also watched and learned. The guards changed every 8 hours. There were always 2 of them outside his cell. They carried weapons that looked like rifles but fired beams of light instead of bullets. The ship, because he was sure he was on a ship now, made a low humming sound that never stopped. He could feel the vibration through the floor. On the 5th day, Vrex came back. He looked tired, frustrated. The human refuses to break, he told Thalen, who stood beside him. This should not be possible. Perhaps we should try a different approach, Thalen suggested. Drugs, or threats to his homeworld. No, Vrex said. I want to know what makes him so strong. What makes humans so difficult to break? We need to understand this. Vrex turned to Jake. Human, you will tell us your name and rank. That is all we ask for now. Just your name. Jake had been waiting for this. He knew that giving small pieces of information could sometimes help. It made the enemy think they were winning. It made them careless, so he decided to give them what they wanted. But he would give them something extra too, something that might help him later. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, he said clearly. United States Navy. Service number 7942638. Some people call me Reaper. Vrex nodded, satisfied. He left the cell, already speaking into a communication device. Jake watched him go and allowed himself another small smile. The name would not mean anything to them. Not yet, but it would. When they searched their intelligence databases, when they asked their superiors, they would find out who Reaper was, and then things would get interesting. Jake settled back against the wall and closed his eyes. He needed rest. Soon, very soon, everything would change. The Galaxians thought they had caught a regular soldier. They would learn they were wrong. They would learn what it meant to cage a predator. And by the time they understood their mistake, it would be too late. Outside his cell, in the corridors of the ship, guards talked in low voices. The human prisoner was strange. He did not act afraid. He did not beg or cry. He just watched everything with those cold blue eyes. It made them nervous. Some of them started avoiding cell duty when they could. In his office, Commander Vrex typed the name into the intelligence network. Morrison, Jake, Reaper. He sent the query and waited. The response would come soon. He expected to find a basic file. A soldier's record. Nothing special, he was wrong. When the file came back, marked with the highest priority level, Vrex felt his blood run cold. He read it once. Then again. Then a third time because he could not believe what he was seeing. This could not be right. The human in his cell could not be the same one in this file. But the picture matched. The description matched. Everything matched. Vrex sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. For the first time in his long military career, he felt real fear. They had not captured a prisoner. They had captured a nightmare. And that nightmare had a name, Reaper. The lights went out at exactly 0300 hours. Total darkness swallowed the detention deck. Emergency systems kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing everything in red light. Alarms screamed through the corridors. But 3 seconds was all Morrison needed. He was already out of his cell when the red lights came on. The lock had been easy once he understood how it worked. The Galaxians used a magnetic system, strong but predictable. The same wire he had used on his restraints had done the job perfectly. The first guard appeared around the corner, weapon raised. Morrison moved like water, smooth and fast. He was behind the guard before the alien could react. One quick strike to the base of the skull. The guard dropped without a sound. Morrison caught the body and lowered it gently to the floor. No noise, no alarm. He took the guard's weapon and knife. The plasma rifle felt strange in his hands. Lighter than human weapons. The balance was off, but it would work. He checked the charge, full. Good. Morrison moved through the corridors with purpose. He knew exactly where he was going. The weapons storage room first, then the communications center, then the bridge. He had planned every step during his days in the cell. 2 more guards came running toward him. They were responding to the alarm. They saw him and raised their weapons. Morrison was faster. 2 quick shots. Both guards fell. He kept moving. No time to stop. Speed was his weapon now. The weapons storage room door was locked. Morrison placed a small charge he had made from components in his cell. It was crude but effective. The door blew inward with a sharp bang. He was inside before the smoke cleared. The guard inside turned, surprised. Morrison shot him once. Then he moved to the weapons racks. He took another rifle, 3 power cells, a better knife, and 2 explosive devices. He strapped them to his body quickly. Every second counted. As he left the room, he set one of the explosives on a timer. 30 seconds. It would destroy the remaining weapons and create a distraction. He was 20 meters away when it detonated. The blast shook the deck. More alarms joined the first ones. Perfect chaos. Commander Vrex heard the explosion from his quarters. He jumped out of his bed and grabbed his communicator. What is happening? He demanded. The human has escaped, his second officer reported. The voice was panicked. He has weapons. Multiple guards are down. He is heading toward the bridge. Vrex felt ice in his blood. No, this could not be happening. He had been about to execute Morrison this morning. He had waited one night too long. Lock down the bridge, seal all doors, send every available guard to stop him. But Morrison was already ahead of him. He had reached the communications center. 3 guards defended it. Morrison took them down with careful shots. 1, 2, 3. He entered the center and went straight to the main console. He had studied Galaxian systems during his intelligence training. The language was different, but the basic structure was similar to human systems. It took him 2 minutes to access the ship's database. He downloaded everything to a small device he had taken from one of the guards. Fleet movements, strategic plans, communication codes, everything. Then he set another explosive. This one would destroy the communications array. The Galaxians would not be able to call for help. They would not be able to warn other ships. He set the timer for 5 minutes and left. The corridor outside was filling with guards. They had finally organized a response. Morrison counted 9 of them. Too many for a direct fight. So he did not fight, he ran. Down a side passage. Through a maintenance area. Up a ladder to the next deck. Behind him the guards followed. They thought they were hunting him. They were wrong. He was leading them. Drawing them away from the bridge. Making them chase shadows while he circled around. The communications array exploded right on schedule. The blast cut power to 3 decks. Life support systems failed in sections 4 through 7. The ship was dying around them and Morrison had barely started. He reached the power distribution center and placed his last explosive. This one was special. When it went off, it would cause a chain reaction. The weapons array would lock up. The engines would shut down to prevent overload. The ship would be crippled. Morrison set the timer for 2 minutes. Then he ran for the bridge. Time was running out. Not for him. For them. The bridge doors were sealed, just as Vrex had ordered, heavy blast doors that should have been impossible to breach. But Morrison had studied them during his reconnaissance. He knew their weakness. The control panel was on the outside. One well-placed shot and the emergency release would trigger. He fired. The panel exploded. The doors groaned and began to open. Morrison did not wait. He kicked them the rest of the way open and stepped onto the bridge. 12 crew members turned to face him. Vrex stood in the center, his weapon raised. But his hands were shaking. Morrison saw fear in those alien eyes. Good. Fear meant respect. Fear meant understanding. I told you, Morrison said calmly. His rifle was steady. His voice was cold. I gave you a choice, Commander. You should have listened. Behind him, the power distribution center exploded. The lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in, but it was weak. The weapons array shut down with a grinding whine. The engines went silent. The entire ship shuddered and went dark except for the dim red emergency lights. Morrison counted to 3 in his head. Then he spoke again. Your life support has about 3 minutes left. Maybe less. Your weapons are offline. Your engines are dead. You cannot fight. You cannot run. You cannot even call for help. So here is what happens next. He took a step forward. Every eye on the bridge followed him. You are going to give me a shuttle. You are going to give me coordinates to the nearest human outpost. And you are going to give me that communication device. The encrypted one. I know you have it, Vrex wanted to refuse. Morrison could see it in his face. But the commander also wanted to live. The choice was simple. Death or surrender. Vrex made his decision. Take it, Vrex said. His voice was broken, defeated. Take everything. Just go. Morrison lowered his rifle slightly. Smart choice, Commander. Now move slowly. Give me what I asked for. No tricks, no surprises. Or I detonate the charges I placed in your reactor core. It was a bluff. Morrison had not placed charges in the reactor. But Vrex did not know that. The commander believed it. Why would he not? Morrison had already done the impossible. What was one more impossible thing? 10 minutes later, Morrison was in a shuttle. He had the coordinates. He had the communication device. He had the intelligence data that would change the war. And he had left behind a ship full of terrified aliens who would never forget the name Reaper. As the shuttle pulled away from the crippled detention ship, Morrison allowed himself to relax for the first time in a week. His body hurt. His ribs were cracked. His shoulder was dislocated. Burns covered his arms. But he was alive. He was free. And he had won. He set the shuttle on autopilot toward human space and leaned back in the seat. Behind him, the Galaxian ship drifted in the darkness, its crew working desperately to repair the damage. They would survive. Barely. But they would never be the same. Commander Vrex watched the shuttle disappear on his screen. He had lost 12 crew members. His ship was destroyed. His career was over. All because of one human, one warrior who refused to be broken. Vrex sat down heavily in his command chair. He understood now. Humans were not like other species. They did not surrender when the odds were impossible. They found a way. And their warriors, their special forces, were the worst of all. They were hunters, predators. And the galaxy had just learned what happened when you tried to cage one. The stolen shuttle made strange noises as it limped through space. The engines were not designed for long flights, and Morrison had pushed them hard to get away from the detention ship. But they held together. Barely. Morrison sat in the pilot's seat, his body screaming with pain. Now that the mission was over, now that he was safe, his body was reminding him of all the damage. 3 cracked ribs, dislocated shoulder, burns from plasma fire, cuts and bruises everywhere. He had reset the shoulder himself, biting down on his jacket to keep from screaming. But physical pain was nothing. He had been through worse. What mattered was the data device in his pocket. The intelligence he had stolen from the Galaxian ship. If this information was as valuable as he thought, it could save thousands of human lives. Maybe millions. Morrison pulled out the encrypted communication device. It looked like a small tablet, but the technology was far more advanced. He powered it on and began searching through the files. His Galaxian language skills were basic, but he had learned enough during his training to understand the important parts. Fleet movements. Detailed maps showing where Galaxian ships would be positioned over the next 3 months. Supply routes. Weak points in their defensive formations. Communication codes. Encryption keys. Everything was here. Everything. But the most valuable information was the attack plan. The Galaxians were preparing a major offensive against 5 human colonies. The document showed exact dates, times, and targets. It was supposed to be a surprise. A devastating blow that would break human resistance in this sector. Not anymore. Morrison checked the shuttle's position. He was 3 hours from the neutral zone. Once he crossed that line, he would be in safe space. The Galaxians would not follow him there. They could not risk starting a larger conflict with the neutral worlds. He used those 3 hours to copy all the intelligence to the shuttle's computer. Then he encrypted it with human military codes. Then he prepared a transmission package. The moment he was safe, he would send everything to human command. They needed to see this immediately. The shuttle crossed into neutral space at 0600 hours. Morrison waited exactly 10 seconds. Then he transmitted the data package. It went out on every secure frequency he knew. Someone would receive it. Someone would act on it. His job was done. 2 hours later, the shuttle docked at Firebase Apollo, a small human military station on the edge of the neutral zone. Morrison barely managed to land the shuttle before his body finally gave out. He collapsed in the pilot's seat, unconscious. The station's medical team found him 20 minutes later. They rushed him to the infirmary. The doctors worked for 3 hours to stabilize him. When they finished, the head doctor, a woman named Kate Rodriguez, looked at her staff and shook her head. I have no idea how he survived this long. He should be dead, but Morrison was not dead. He woke up 12 hours later in a hospital bed. His body was wrapped in bandages. Tubes connected him to various machines. Everything hurt, but he was alive. The first person he saw was Colonel Valerie Hunt, the station commander. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes. She had been a soldier for 20 years, and her face showed every battle. But when she looked at Morrison, there was respect in those eyes. Jake, she said quietly, we thought you were dead. We got the report from New Horizon. The whole team was listed as killed in action. Morrison's voice was rough. His throat hurt from screaming during his interrogation. They were killed. I was captured. But I got out. Hunt smiled slightly. We received your transmission. The intelligence data. High Command is going crazy over it. They said it is the most valuable information we have gotten in 5 years of war. Good, Morrison said. Then it was worth it. The data Morrison brought back changed everything. Human fleets repositioned immediately based on the intelligence. The colonies that were supposed to be surprise targets were reinforced. Extra ships, extra soldiers, extra weapons. When the Galaxian offensive finally came, it walked straight into a trap. What should have been easy victories became bloody defeats. The Empire lost 12 major warships in the first week. Thousands of their soldiers died. Their supply lines collapsed. Admiral Corthan received the casualty reports with growing horror. The humans had known. They had known everything. How was that possible? The attack plans had been top secret. Only the highest-ranking officers had access. Then he received another report. From Commander Vrex. The report explained what had happened on the detention ship, how Morrison had escaped, how he had stolen intelligence data, how he had crippled the ship and disappeared into the night. Corthan read the report 3 times. Each time he felt more afraid. The humans had not just rescued their warrior. They had turned a disaster into a victory. 1 man, 1 prisoner, and he had changed the entire course of the war. But the intelligence data was not the only thing that spread through the galaxy. The story spread too, faster than any official report. Soldiers told other soldiers. Officers whispered to their subordinates. Even civilians heard the tale. The Galaxians had captured Reaper. They had thought they held one of humanity's warriors in their grasp. Instead, they had learned a terrible truth. Humans were not like other species. When you captured them, when you hurt them, when you tried to break them, they did not surrender. They fought back. And their special forces warriors were the most dangerous of all. The story grew with each telling. Morrison became a legend. Some versions said he killed 100 guards. Some said he destroyed the ship completely. The truth was impressive enough, but legends did not care about truth. They cared about the message, and the message was clear. Do not mess with humans. Do not think you can break them. Do not believe that superior numbers or technology will save you, because they will find a way. They always find a way. On Firebase Apollo, Morrison spent 2 weeks recovering. Dr. Rodriguez tried to make him stay longer, but he refused. His body was healing. His mind was sharp. He needed to get back to work. Colonel Hunt tried to convince him to accept a promotion. A desk job, training new soldiers. You have done enough, Jake, she told him. Let someone else take the risks now. But Morrison shook his head. With respect, Colonel, no. My place is out there. In the field. That is where I am useful, Hunt sighed. She had expected that answer. Men like Morrison did not retire to safe positions. They kept fighting until they could not fight anymore. It was not heroism. It was not glory-seeking. It was simply who they were. Before Morrison left, Admiral Corthan sent a message. It came through official channels, encrypted, secret, but the meaning was clear. It was a warning to all Galaxian forces. If you capture a human Special Forces operative, terminate immediately or release. Do not interrogate. Do not hold. The risk is too great. The message specifically mentioned Morrison's name, Reaper. If you encounter this individual, avoid engagement. If engagement is unavoidable, use maximum force. Do not attempt capture under any circumstances. Hunt showed the intercepted message to Morrison. He read it and smiled that small, dangerous smile. It is nice to be appreciated, he said. 3 days later, Morrison shipped out on his next mission. Another impossible task, another chance to prove that humans could not be beaten. As his transport ship jumped to hyperspace, he thought about his team. The friends who had died on New Horizon. They would never be forgotten. He would make sure of that. Every mission he completed, every enemy he defeated, every victory he won. It was for them. Behind him, the galaxy was changing. The Galaxian Empire was learning caution. Other alien species were taking notice. The humans were not prey. They were predators. And they had warriors who refused to quit. The legend of Reaper would spread far and wide. And every time someone told the story, they would remember the lesson. Never underestimate humanity. Never think they are broken, because they will surprise you. And by then it will be too late. Admiral Corthan had served in the Galaxian military for 40 years. He had fought in 12 major wars. He had commanded fleets that destroyed entire planets. Nothing scared him anymore. Or so he thought until he read the file on his desk. The name at the top of the file was simple enough. Jake Morrison, human, age 32. But as Corthan read further, his 4 hearts began to beat faster. This was not just a soldier. This was something else entirely. 63 solo missions behind enemy lines. Every single one successful. 247 confirmed kills. 17 hostage rescues against impossible odds. The numbers kept going, each one more impressive and terrifying than the last. But it was the incidents that made Corthan's blood run cold. Morrison had survived things that should have killed any living creature. He had been exposed to the vacuum of space for 2 full minutes when his suit was damaged. He should have died. Instead, he somehow made it back to his ship and completed his mission. He had been poisoned 3 separate times with toxins that were supposed to be instant death. Each time he survived long enough to reach medical help. Then there was the fall. During a mission on Europa Station, Morrison had fallen 40 meters onto solid concrete. He broke both legs, 3 ribs, and his left arm. He still managed to crawl half a mile to the extraction point. The mission report said he was joking with the medical team when they picked him up. Corthan read about Proxima Station 3 times because he could not believe it. A Galaxian death squad, 27 of the Empire's best warriors, had attacked the station. They killed everyone. Almost everyone. Morrison had been there on another mission. When the attack happened, he was the only defender left alive. The report said Morrison hunted them for 3 weeks. 3 weeks in the dark, destroyed corridors of Proxima Station. He had no support, no backup. Just him and whatever weapons he could find. One by one, he killed all 27 warriors. The last 5 tried to escape. They never made it to their ship. Corthan put down the file and looked at his communication device. Commander Vrex was waiting for orders. The commander had asked what to do with the prisoner. Now Corthan understood why the question had come with such urgency. He typed out his response carefully. Terminate the prisoner immediately. Do not attempt further interrogation. Do not give him any opportunity. This is a priority, 1 order. But as Corthan sent the message, he wondered if it was already too late. On the detention ship, word had spread among the crew. The guards whispered to each other during shift changes. The human prisoner was not normal. There was something wrong about him. He never panicked. He never begged. He just watched everything with those cold, calculating eyes. One guard, a young soldier named Crix, had made the mistake of looking directly at Morrison during a routine check. Those blue eyes had fixed on him, and Crix had felt like prey being studied by a hunter. He requested a transfer to another duty station that same day. The story of Reaper spread through the ship like a disease. The older soldiers, the ones who had fought humans before, started to remember stories they had heard, tales of human warriors who refused to die, who turned impossible situations into victories, who hunted their enemies with patience and skill that seemed almost supernatural. Commander Vrex read the Admiral's orders and felt relief wash over him. Yes, terminate the prisoner. That was the right choice. The human was too dangerous to keep alive. But Vrex made a mistake. He decided to wait until morning. One more night would not matter, and he wanted to prepare everything carefully. That night, Morrison lay on the cold floor of his cell and smiled in the darkness. He had finished working on the restraints 3 hours ago. The wire from the ventilation cover had done its job perfectly. His hands were free now, though he kept them behind his back as if they were still tied. He had spent 5 days learning everything about this ship. He knew the guard rotation schedule. He knew where the weapons were stored. He knew which systems were critical and which could be damaged without killing everyone on board. He had counted the crew members. 43 on this deck alone. Maybe 200 total on the whole ship. Morrison had also learned something else. Something important. The Galaxians had searched his name. He could tell by the way Vrex looked at him now. The fear in those alien eyes. Good. Fear made people stupid. Fear made them make mistakes. He thought about his team, about the friends who had died on New Horizon. They deserved justice. More than that, they deserved to be remembered. Morrison would make sure of that. He would get out of this ship. He would get home. And he would make the Galaxians understand what it meant to attack humans. The ventilation cover above him was loose enough to remove now. He had been working on it little by little, careful not to attract attention. Beyond that cover was a network of air ducts. They would be tight, uncomfortable, but they would give him access to the whole ship. Morrison closed his eyes and went through the plan one more time. Every step, every backup plan, every contingency. His instructors at SEAL training had drilled it into him. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Never leave anything to chance. He waited until the guard shift changed at midnight. 2 new guards took their positions outside his cell. They were tired, bored. They had pulled the night shift, which nobody liked. Perfect. Morrison stood up slowly, quietly. He reached up and removed the ventilation cover. It came away without a sound. He pulled himself up into the duct and replaced the cover behind him. The guards never noticed. They were too busy talking to each other, complaining about their duties. Inside the air duct, Morrison began to crawl. The metal was cold against his skin. The space was barely wide enough for his shoulders. But he had trained in worse conditions. He had crawled through sewers and collapsed buildings. This was nothing. He moved slowly, careful not to make noise. He counted the turns as he went, building a mental map of the duct system. After 20 minutes, he reached his first target, the power coupling that fed energy to the detention deck. It was exactly where he thought it would be, based on the vibrations he had felt through his cell floor. Morrison studied the coupling carefully. It was well designed, secure, but everything had a weakness. He found it after 5 minutes of examination, a connection point that was just slightly exposed. If that connection failed, the whole deck would lose power. Emergency systems would take over, but there would be a few seconds of complete darkness first. He moved on to his next target, the weapons storage room. It took him another 30 minutes of crawling to get there. Through the ventilation grate, he could see the room below. Rows of rifles, plasma weapons, explosive devices, everything he would need. There was one guard in the room. Just one. Morrison watched him for 10 minutes, learning his pattern. The guard walked around the room every 5 minutes. He checked the weapons. Then he went back to his desk and looked at a screen, probably checking messages or watching entertainment. Morrison continued his journey through the ducts. He mapped out the entire deck, located all the critical systems, counted every guard, identified every escape route. By the time he crawled back toward his cell, he had a complete picture of his prison. He dropped back down into his cell and replaced the ventilation cover. Then he lay back down on the floor and put his hands behind his back as if they were still tied. The guards had not noticed anything. They were still talking outside, unaware that their prisoner had just walked through half the ship above their heads. Morrison closed his eyes and let himself relax. Tomorrow, Vrex would probably try to kill him. He could feel it coming. The commander's fear had turned to decision, but that was fine. Morrison was ready. He had his plan. He had his target. And soon, very soon, he would show these aliens what happened when you caged a human warrior. Sleep came easily. He had learned long ago to rest whenever he could. The next few days would be hard, violent, exhausting, but he would survive. He always did. That was what made him Reaper. Not his skills or his training, though those helped. It was his absolute refusal to give up. His certainty that he would find a way no matter what. Outside his cell, the guards continued their patrol. They did not know that everything was about to change. They did not know that the quiet human prisoner was actually a loaded weapon waiting to fire. They would learn soon enough, and by then it would be far too late to stop what was coming. 6 months passed since Morrison's escape from the Calaxian detention ship. 6 months of war, 6 months of battles. But something had changed in the galaxy. The Calaxians, once so confident in their power, now fought with caution. Fear had entered their ranks. Morrison completed 7 more missions during those months, each one dangerous, each one successful. But he never sought attention for his work. When reporters wanted to interview him, he refused. When politicians tried to use his story for propaganda, he disappeared on the next assignment. The story of Reaper spread anyway. Human soldiers whispered it in barracks. They drew strength from knowing that one of their own had turned captivity into victory. Young recruits asked their officers about Morrison. Is it true? Did he really escape from a Calaxian warship alone? The officers would smile and nod. Every word is true, and it shows you what humans can do when we refuse to quit. On the Calaxian side, the story was different. Warriors spoke Morrison's name with respect and fear. Commanders added his profile to their threat databases. Training programs were updated to teach soldiers what to do if they encountered human special forces. The answer was simple. Avoid them. Run if possible. Fight only if you have no choice. But it was not just the Calaxians who took notice. Other species in the galaxy watched the war carefully. The Valinor Confederacy, neutral until now, started negotiations with human diplomats. If humans could fight this hard against the mighty Calaxian Empire, perhaps they would make good allies. The Threxian swarm, a species of insect-like warriors who had been planning their own invasion of human space, quietly shelved those plans. Fighting humans seemed more trouble than it was worth. Even the architects, mysterious ancient beings who rarely interfered in galactic affairs, noted humanity's resistance with something like respect. These humans were young, primitive compared to older species. But they had something special. A refusal to accept defeat, a creativity in finding solutions, a stubborn determination that impressed even beings millions of years old. The war continued for another year. Slowly the tide turned. The Calaxian Empire, once on the offensive, found itself defending its own territory. Human fleets pushed deeper into their space. Colonies were liberated. Supply lines were cut. The Empire bled from 1,000 wounds. Finally, exhausted and defeated, the Calaxians agreed to negotiate. The peace talks took place on a neutral world. Both sides sent their best diplomats. The terms were harsh for the Empire. They would withdraw from all disputed territories. They would recognize human sovereignty. They would pay reparations for the colonies they had destroyed. In exchange, humanity agreed not to press their advantage. They would not invade Calaxian homeworlds. They would not demand unconditional surrender. It was a fair peace, a peace that both sides could accept. When the treaty was signed, Morrison was on a mission 300 light-years away. He did not attend the ceremony. He did not give speeches about victory. He just kept doing his job. Because the war might be over, but there were still threats out there. Still missions to complete. Still people who needed protecting. Years later, Morrison finally retired from active duty. He was 45 years old. His body was covered in scars. He had injuries that would never fully heal. But he was alive. Against all odds, he had survived. The military wanted to give him medals. Lots of medals. They wanted to hold ceremonies and make speeches. Morrison agreed reluctantly. He stood in his dress uniform while admirals and generals praised his service. He shook hands and smiled for photos. But inside, he just wanted it to be over. After the ceremony, he found Colonel Hunt on the observation deck. She had been promoted to general now. Her hair was completely gray, but she still had those hard, knowing eyes. Any regrets? She asked, looking out at the stars. Morrison thought about it for a long moment. Then he smiled. That small, dangerous smile that had terrified so many enemies. Only one. I wish I could have seen Commander Vrex's face when he realized I was not bluffing about the reactor charges. Hunt laughed. They stood together in comfortable silence. Two warriors who had survived the impossible. Two friends who understood the cost of victory. Retirement for Morrison meant training the next generation. He worked at the Special Operations Academy, teaching young soldiers the skills that had kept him alive. He taught them how to think, how to adapt, how to turn any situation into an advantage. But most importantly, he taught them the mindset. Being a warrior is not about being fearless, he would tell them. It is about being more afraid of failing your mission than of dying. It is about refusing to quit when everyone says it is impossible. It is about finding a way even when there is no way. The students listened carefully. They knew they were learning from a legend. Some of them had heard the story of Reaper since they were children. Now they were being taught by the man himself. Morrison's escape from the Calaxian ship became required study at the academy. Instructors used it as a case study in everything from resource management to psychological warfare. How had he escaped with no weapons? How had he learned the ship's layout from his cell? How had he turned his captor's fear into a weapon? The answers were simple but hard to master. Observation, patience, planning, and most of all, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. These became the standards that every special operations soldier tried to meet. Outside Earth's atmosphere, in the vast darkness of space, new threats were always emerging. Pirates, terrorists, alien species testing human defenses. But they all learned the same lesson that the Galaxians had learned. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest or the smartest. They did not have the best technology or the biggest ships, but they had something more valuable. They had warriors who refused to quit, soldiers who could turn any weakness into strength, people who laughed at death and treated impossible odds as a personal challenge. The legend of Reaper endured long after Morrison retired. Parents told the story to their children. Teachers used it in history classes. Military commanders referenced it in strategy meetings. It became part of human culture. A reminder of what humans could achieve when they refused to give up. On Galaxian worlds, the story was told differently. It was a warning, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating other species. Some Galaxians claimed the story was exaggerated. No single being could do what Morrison had done. But the survivors of his escape knew better. They had been there. They had seen it with their own eyes. Commander Vrex lived the rest of his life in shame. He was stripped of his rank. He never commanded a ship again. But he wrote a memoir about his experience. It became required reading in Galaxian military academies. The lesson was clear. Never capture a human warrior if you can avoid it. And if you do capture one, end the situation quickly. Because every moment you wait gives them time to plan, time to learn, time to find your weaknesses. 20 years after the war ended, Morrison attended a memorial service for his team. The friends who had died on New Horizon. Their names were carved into a wall of black stone. Hundreds of names, thousands of names, all the soldiers who had given everything for humanity's survival. Morrison stood before the wall and placed his hand on the stone. He remembered each face, each voice, each laugh. They were gone, but they were not forgotten. They would never be forgotten. A young soldier approached him nervously. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Lieutenant Morrison, the Reaper?" Morrison turned and looked at the young man. He saw himself 20 years ago, eager, determined, ready to face anything. "Just Morrison now. I am retired." The soldier nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you did, for showing us what is possible." Morrison smiled. His face was older now, the scars more visible. But his eyes still had that sharp, dangerous look. "Just remember one thing. I am not special. Any of you could do what I did if you had to. That is what it means to be human. We find a way. We always find a way." The young soldier saluted and walked away. Morrison turned back to the memorial wall. He stood there for a long time, remembering, honoring, promising that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. As the sun set over the memorial, casting long shadows across the stone, Morrison allowed himself to feel pride. Not in himself, in humanity, in what they had achieved together. In the fact that when the galaxy tried to break them, they had refused to bend. That was the legacy of Reaper. Not one man's victories, but proof of what all humans could accomplish. The refusal to surrender, the creativity to find solutions, the courage to face impossible odds. These were not special powers. They were human powers, and they would endure as long as humanity existed. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and the lesson would not be forgotten. When you cage a human warrior, you're not just fighting one person. You are fighting the entire spirit of humanity, the accumulated determination of billions of beings who refuse to quit. And that is a fight you cannot win.